You ever notice how some people never ask for help? Not because they do not need it. Not because life has been easy for them. They just move through the world like needing someone is a dangerous thing to admit. They fix things before asking. They stay quiet when they are overwhelmed. They carry everyone else's problems, but when someone asks, "Are you okay?" they say, "Yeah, I'm fine," even when they are not fine at all. And if you look closely, many of those people belong to one generation, Generation X. Born roughly between 1965 and 1980, Gen X is often treated like the forgotten middle child of modern history. Boomers get blamed, millennials get analyzed. Gen Z becomes the headline every week, but Gen X usually stands in the background, makes a sarcastic comment, then quietly solves the problem everyone else is still discussing. But here is what people often miss. Gen X was not born independent. They were trained to be independent. They were raised in a world that taught them early that depending on people was risky. Waiting for someone to save you was risky. Asking too much was risky. So they learned to need no one. And that lesson changed how they work, love, trust, parent, and survive. To understand Gen X, picture the world they came home to. It is the late 1970s or early 1980s. School ends. Kids walk home alone or ride their bikes through the neighborhood. Maybe they have a key in their pocket. Maybe it is hidden under a flower pot. Maybe they know which window is loose enough to climb through if they forget it. They get inside, and the house is quiet. No phone in your pocket, no location tracking, no text me when you get home, no video call. Just you, the refrigerator, the television, and several hours to manage yourself. You make a snack. You answer the phone if it rings. You decide whether the weird noise outside matters. You know not to open the door unless you recognize the voice. And without anyone saying it directly, you learn something powerful. Safety is not something given to you. Safety is something you create. That changes a child's nervous system. A child who grows up constantly supervised learns that help is nearby. A child who grows up alone learns that help might not come fast enough. So the brain adapts. It becomes watchful, practical, and fast. It starts asking, what could go wrong, and what would I do if it did? That is why so many Gen Xers seem calm in a crisis. They are not calm because nothing affects them. They are calm because part of them has been rehearsing disaster since childhood. The car breaks down. Figure it out. Money gets tight. Figure it out. Someone disappoints them. Adjust, continue, and do not make a scene. To other generations, this can look like emotional distance. But for Gen X, it often feels like basic survival. They were not raised in a culture that asked children, "How are you feeling about this?" They were raised in a culture that said, "You'll live." Fall off your bike? You'll live. Get your feelings hurt? You'll live. Scared at home alone? You'll live. After hearing that enough times, you start to believe that living is the only requirement. Not comfort, not support, not emotional safety. Just get through it. That is where the "I'm fine" personality comes from. For Gen X, "I'm fine" does not always mean "I am okay." Sometimes it means, "I have handled worse." Sometimes it means, "I do not know how to explain what I need." Sometimes it means, "If I admit I am not fine, I might fall apart, and I do not have time for that." This generation learned self-control before self-expression. They learned competence before vulnerability. They learned how to read a room before they learned how to ask for reassurance. And the complicated part is, it worked. Their independence made them capable. They cooked simple meals, found their way without GPS, entertained themselves without algorithms, and fixed things because replacing them was not always an option. They learned that boredom would not kill them. They learned that loneliness could be survived. They learned that adults were not always available, not always reliable, and not always right. That creates a certain kind of person: resourceful, skeptical, funny at the wrong moments, allergic to drama, deeply loyal but slow to trust, helpful but terrible at receiving help. And maybe the biggest wound Gen X carries is that their strength became invisible. The kid who does not complain gets ignored. The kid who figures it out gets more responsibility. The kid who seems mature gets treated like they do not need comfort. That happened to Gen X on a massive scale. They became the low-maintenance generation, the "they'll be okay" generation. People ask, why is Gen X so sarcastic? Because sarcasm was safer than sadness. A joke gives you distance. A joke lets you admit the truth without sounding needy. A joke lets you say, "This hurts," while pretending it does not. For Gen X, irony became emotional armor. They grew up in a world where adults said everything was fine, while the news showed layoffs, scandals, divorce, nuclear anxiety, and institutions failing in real time. They were told to respect authority while watching authority embarrass itself. They were told loyalty mattered while watching loyal workers get replaced. They were told marriage was forever while many families split apart. So they developed one very specific emotional skill: believing nothing completely. Not because they wanted to be negative, but because believing too easily had consequences. If someone promises Gen X something, part of them starts building a backup plan. If a company says, "We are family," they hear, "Update your resume." If a leader says, "Trust me," they watch what that leader actually does. This is not paranoia. It is learned pattern recognition, and it shows up everywhere. At work, Gen X does not usually need motivational speeches. They need clear expectations, basic respect, and enough space to do the job. They are not impressed by titles. They are impressed by competence. That same pattern shapes their relationships. Gen X can love deeply, but they often love carefully. They may not flood you with constant reassurance. They may not narrate every emotion. They may show love by fixing your car, picking you up from the airport, sending you something useful, or remembering a small detail you mentioned months ago. Their love is often practical, not because they do not feel, but because feelings without action did not mean much in the world they grew up in. Words were easy. People said, "I'll be there. You can count on me. Everything is fine." Then life proved otherwise. So Gen X learned to trust behavior over language. If they show up, they care. If they make time, they care. If they help you move, fix your computer, or sit with you in silence when your life falls apart, they care more than they will probably say out loud. But here is where it becomes painful. When you spend your whole life being the dependable one, you can forget that you are allowed to be held too. A lot of Gen Xers became the emotional utility players of their families. The one who handles the crisis. The one who does not panic. The one who takes care of aging parents, struggling kids, workplace chaos, bills, repairs, and everyone's unspoken expectations. And because they do it quietly, people assume it is easy for them. It is not. They are tired. But many of them would rather be exhausted than dependent. Because dependence still feels dangerous. It feels like becoming the child in the empty house again, waiting for someone who may or may not come home. That childhood lesson follows them into marriage, career, and parenthood. Many Gen X parents looked at their own childhood and said, "My kids will never feel as alone as I did." So they became more present, more attentive, and more emotionally aware. But part of them still worries. They worry their kids are too protected, too monitored, too dependent on instant answers, and too used to being guided through every step. Because Gen X knows something uncomfortable. Confidence is not built only through encouragement. Sometimes it is built by being left alone long enough to discover you can handle yourself. That does not mean neglect was good. It means adaptation is complicated. Gen X does not want their kids to suffer the way they did, but they do want them to have the one gift that came from it: the belief that they can survive without an audience, without applause, and without someone walking them through everything. That is the hidden inheritance of Gen X, self-reliance. But self-reliance is both a superpower and a prison. It helps you stay calm when things fall apart. It makes you useful. It makes you hard to manipulate. It gives you a strong inner backbone. But it can also make you lonely. Because if your identity is built around needing no one, help can feel like debt. Rest can feel like laziness. Vulnerability can feel like weakness. And care can feel suspicious, even when it is real. Gen X became so good at surviving without support that sometimes they do not recognize support when it finally arrives. Someone says, "You do not have to do this alone," and their first instinct is not relief. It is distrust. Why? What do you want? How long will this last? What happens when I need too much? And maybe that is why Gen X has such a complicated relationship with attention. They do not usually want to be the main character. They came from a time when privacy was normal. You could make mistakes and they could disappear. You could be awkward without it becoming content. So when the modern world says, "Share everything," Gen X hears something different. They hear, "Expose yourself." They hear, "Give strangers access." They hear, "Turn your life into evidence." And a generation raised to protect itself does not surrender privacy easily. They were young enough to adapt to computers, but old enough to remember life before the internet swallowed everything. They remember maps and message boards, mixtapes and streaming, payphones and smartphones, handwritten notes and group chats. They are the bridge. And being the bridge is exhausting because bridges get walked on from both directions. And yet, they keep going. Quietly, they quietly work, quietly worry, quietly help, quietly prepare for disaster, quietly love people in practical ways, quietly wonder if anyone notices how much they carry. But maybe the most important thing to understand about Gen X is this: they do not need no one because they are empty. They learn to need no one because at some point, Needing someone did not feel safe. That is different. Underneath the sarcasm, independence, emotional restraint, and whatever attitude, there is often a person who learned very young not to expect too much, not to ask too loudly, not to trust too quickly, and not to fall apart where people could see. And if you are Gen X, maybe that made you strong. Maybe it made you capable. Maybe it helped you survive things other people never saw. But maybe it also taught you to confuse being needed with being loved. Maybe it taught you that your value comes from usefulness. Maybe it taught you that if you are not fixing something, carrying something, or solving something, you are not doing enough. Maybe the next chapter for Gen X is not learning how to be stronger. They already know how to be strong. Maybe the next chapter is learning how to receive. To let someone help without feeling weak. To rest without guilt. To say, I am not fine, and discover that the world does not end. Because being raised to need no one may have changed everything. But it does not have to be the end of the story. Maybe the most radical thing Gen X can do now is not prove they can survive alone. They already proved that. Maybe the most radical thing is allowing themselves to be supported, seen, and cared for, without turning it into a joke 5 seconds later. And if this made you think of yourself, your parent, your partner, your coworker, or that one person who always says, I'm fine, while holding the entire room together, maybe send this to them. Not to call them out, just to remind them that someone finally noticed.